Thank you for praying. Today we're going to take a look at a very familiar story. Many of us perhaps can remember times in Sunday school when, as we were youths, the teacher told us the amazing tale of David versus Goliath. We're not going to read the entirety of 1 Samuel 17 this morning. That's 58 some verses. And what we're going to do instead, I'm going to ask you to open your Bible to that passage, and we're going to look around a little bit. It's my belief that we could spend months of Sundays returning to 1 Samuel 17. We could look at the passage from at least 4 different perspectives, and God would reveal 4 different truths to us. But today, we're going to take a look at this one perspective. And hopefully, God will impress upon us prayerfully that with God, no problem is insurmountable. There is nothing God cannot fix. Some of you may remember Art Linkletter's show, Kids Say the Darndest Things. Smile if you remember that. Because it's worth smiling about. It's a cute show. On one of those shows, Linkletter asked a boy what lesson we can learn about the story of David and Goliath. And without having to consider it much, he responded, duck. As we've heard this tale from our youngest lives, it's something that we're probably familiar with even as children. And so here's a set of riddles that children have asked about the account of David and Goliath. The first is, who's the greatest babysitter mentioned in the Bible? You have to say David because he rocked Goliath to sleep. These are kids' jokes. I'm not promising anything. Why was Goliath so surprised when David hit him with a slingshot? It had never entered his mind before. And lastly, if Goliath is resurrected, would you like to tell him that joke? No, he already fell for it once. That was all right. Good. We got one good one out of the 3. In my personal devotions earlier this week, I discovered that when you read the whole account in one sitting, starting with chapter 15, 16, 17, and 18, you get a different perspective on the story of David squaring off against Goliath. I later discovered that in all my years of ministry, I have never preached on this passage. So here's the first today. We're going to look at 3 things that come out of this passage, and there's a little mistake in your message notes. There shouldn't be 2 second points. There's a second and a third, so when you come to the last, change the 2 to a 3. What we're going to do this morning is like a boxing match. We're going to introduce the contestants and then let them duke it out and see what happens. So, in this corner, at 9 feet, 9 inches, 668 pounds, the Philistine champion, the Gath giant, Goliath. What do we know, first of all, about Goliath? Well, he was from Gath. That's not very helpful because there are 3 or 4 cities named Gath mentioned in the Bible, and yet we can assume pretty safely that it was the one that was located within the borders of Philistia. But in verse 4, if you would look at that for a moment, please, there's a turn of phrase there that gives us a little bit of information. It says that Goliath was out of the Philistine camp. That means he was encamped with the Philistine army, which leaves open the possibility that he was not a Philistine himself, but had merely been co-opted by them, hired by them. In church league softball, we call these people strikers. They They didn't really go to the church, but they were put on the team because they could hit. The Bible talks about 3 different races of giants. Goliath may have been one of these peoples who were among the original settlers in Canaan. You can look at Joshua chapter 11, verse 22 as an example. Now the text describes him as a giant. That as well doesn't give us a lot of definition, given the fact that people of the time were on average 5 foot to 5 foot 3 inches in height. So a person 6'1" or 6'3" like myself would seem pretty gigantic in those terms. So when we say that he was 9 foot 9 inches tall, we're going to the outer boundary of what is possible there. Look at the text, and it describes in detail, verses 3 to 7, the armaments of Goliath. They were big. They were shiny. They were imposing and intimidating. In fact, as we look at the text, what we're going to understand is that Goliath is meant to be intimidating. Sure, a 9 foot 9 inch guy who's basically carrying around a fence post with a sharp point at the end, that would be intimidating. The second question we can ask about Goliath: what hope did the Israelites have of defeating him? And the answer is no military hope, apparently. The challenge that Goliath issued to the Israelite armies was perfectly in order with the customs of the time. It seems a little ridiculous to us that 2 armies would meet on opposite sides of a valley and then send out challengers to settle the issue, to try to avoid an all-out war by having a boxing match of sorts in the center ring. And it seems even stranger still that they would spend 40 days doing it. Picture that. Over a month. They were encamped and looking at each other, and this process just went on and on. Now, obviously, if you're on the Philistine side, having a 9 foot 9 inch guy is going to look like a sure victory for you. You want to pursue this method because an all-out war, who knows? But when we've got big guy on our side, and he's fighting for all of us, that plan sounds like aces. Now, the purpose of Goliath was to intimidate the Israelite army. The text tells us that it worked. Look at verse 16. It tells us that they were there 40 days. If anybody was going to come and fight this guy, you would have thought he'd have picked day 39 at least. But no one came forward. Look at verse 11, and it puts it more to the point. It says there that the Israelite soldiers were dismayed and terrified. Was Goliath intimidating? You bet. We can see it by the effect he had on the Israelite army. Now imagine how big the smile on Goliath's face got when David walked forward. You got to be kidding. In fact, he said, "Am I a dog that you come at me with a stick?" That was not friendly. That was insulting. So we have the giant and the boy. Seems like an unequal match. Let's take a look at Goliath's opponent. In the opposite corner, at 4 feet, 11 1/4 inches, and that's if he's wearing high sandals. 92 pounds, soaking wet, the slinging shepherd, David. What do we know about David? The most important thing we know at this point, if we've read chapter 16, is that David has already been anointed as the new king of Israel. I think we miss that a lot of the times when we jump over chapter 16 to go to chapter 17. At the end, as a matter of fact, of 1 Samuel 15, God announced to the prophet Samuel that he was grieved that he had made Saul king of Israel. When God says he's grieved by something, folks, that's serious business. So then, in chapter 16, after a lengthy selection process, God revealed to Samuel who would replace Saul as king. And the sons of Jesse lined up and came to Samuel one at a time. And one at a time, Samuel thought, this must be the one. And God said, no, not that one. You look at the outside. You think he looks impressive. But I look at the inside, and I know his heart. So Samuel finally says, Jesse, are these all your boys? And Jesse says, well, yeah, except for the youngest. You don't want to see him. Call him in. And sure enough, the youngest who had been out in the field with the sheep was the man God would make king over Israel. Now here's the unusual part. Samuel, the prophet, anoints David with oil, signifying that he is king, but they tell no one else. Nothing else is done about it. But look at chapter 16, verse 13, if you turn there. And after he has been anointed, it is said of David, from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. From that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. Now, it didn't make David grow to be 9 feet 9 inches. It didn't make him overbound and muscular. It changed him, more importantly, on the inside. Contrast that with the very next verse where it says, now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, the current king, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. And as we read on through the book of 1 Samuel, the last half of the book is this painful, slow, difficult process where Saul is gradually replaced by David as the king of Israel. And this combat with Goliath is step one in that process. What else do we know about David? He's the youngest son of Jesse's family, a good-looking kid, according to verses 33 and 42. His job was to tend sheep in the field. And when we look at this passage, we see elements of David's character emerging. Look at verses 17 to 22. Jesse approached his son David and said, David, I got a job for you. I imagine that it might have been a temptation to roll his eyes, because he's already the youngest. He already spends all his time out in the field with his sheep. What do you got for me, Dad? Well, it's some grunt work. I need you to take this food to your brothers and find out what's happening at the front, because it's been, 40 days and nothing seems to be changing. Okay, Dad. You see here the obedience of David to do as his father asked. Look at verses 23 to 26, where we hear the outrage of David when he, for the first time, hears the insults, hears the blasphemy, sees the defiance on the part of the big guy for the Philistines. And he wants to know why this has gone on. Why has this guy been allowed to blaspheme the name of the Lord God and slander the people of Israel? And his brothers are like, yeah, you little pipsqueak. We've been here the whole time. You can't lecture us. Why don't you go back home where you belong? In verses 34 to 37, David showed confidence. He showed confidence by going to King Saul and volunteering himself. He described how he survived the attacks of the bear and the lion out in the field as he defended the lives of his sheep. But look at verse 37. What does David say? Does he say, oh, I'm such an ace shot. I'm a real marksman with this sling. No, he's not talking about himself at all. He says, the Lord delivered him. A man of faith, a young man of faith, and he understood that God had delivered him from danger in the field. Then in verses 45 to 47, as he rebukes Goliath, David again expressed his confidence in God. So we have here a young man who is obedient, who knows how to show righteous anger, and who is confident because of the Lord, not because of himself. So God is taking David and he is using him as the solution to the problem of this war. How is David the solution? One explanation is to look at Goliath's disadvantages. Now this is going to seem a little contrary to what I said earlier. This guy has no apparent disadvantages. But in an article entitled 3 Things People Get Wrong About David and Goliath, Bill Murphy Jr. points out a couple of things. 1, Goliath can't see. Scientists have speculated that Goliath may have had a disorder called acromegaly. Have you heard of that before? Because I sure hadn't. Acromegaly is a condition that causes a person to grow beyond the usual height. But the problem is it can also lead to double vision and extreme nearsightedness. Look at the text. Interestingly, it supports this theory. Verse 41. It says, Goliath and his shield bearer kept moving closer to David. Now, the obvious reason for moving closer is so that he can swing his sword. But remember, Goliath also had a spear, so he didn't have to move forward to attack David. It's possible he had to move forward just to see David. In verse 45, Goliath taunted David, telling him to come here. Why would he say that? Except maybe he couldn't see. And so Murphy comments, quote, big competitors' perceived advantages can often mask even bigger disadvantages. End quote. David is also a solution because Goliath is powerless. And here, I think, friends, we want to see what the text is telling us but not saying out loud. The text is telling us that psychologically, Goliath was designed to intimidate. And the Philistines are trying to put on a big con game here. Look back at verse 1. Who started this whole thing? The Philistines did. And so I believe there was a plot, there was a plan here to intimidate the Israelites into giving up their territory without fighting. So they got the big guy, and they made armor and weapons for him that were as fearsome looking as their craftsmen could make them. And then they came arrayed in battle to fight the Israelites. And they said, wait a minute, before we mix it up, how's about we have our champions fight instead? Oh, okay. Goliath, will you come forward, please? Oh, my goodness. You see how this plan is developing, how they attempted to deceive the people of God and trick them into giving up without fighting. Psychologically, that's what's going on. Tactically, David has the advantage of mobility. Why does the text go into all the detail about David trying on Saul's armor and then taking it off? Well, one reason is it wants us to understand that this came from God and not because Saul's armor was so great. But the other reason is that it gave David the advantage of striking first and striking at range. And that's part of the reason he won. Another explanation is to look at David's tactical asset. David is deadly. You read through this entire account, and the Bible never says that David went into battle with only a sling. We think of slings and slingshots as children's toys, potentially destructive, but toys. Only in this time, in the hands of a skilled slinger, the weapon was on a par with a bow. Armies of the day had divisions of nothing but slingers, and shepherds used slings to defend their flocks from predators. I've read that in the right hands, a rock from a sling has the same stopping power as a .45 caliber bullet. Now, I don't care how many feet tall you are. You take one of them between the eyes, the story is over. David pressed his advantage, used his deadly weapon, and attacked Goliath before he could get close enough to swing his sword. Third and finally, what's the outcome of the fight? Well, we all know it. But in this case, TKO doesn't mean technical knockout. It means totally killed out. One result of this was peace for Israel. Look at verse 51. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. The Israelites, we learn in verses 52 to 54, followed the Philistines, and from that valley all the way to their cities, there was a trail of dead bodies, strewn weapons of war, and plunder. Now this is important, folks, for one reason that we may not realize. The Philistines had the secret of iron. They had blacksmiths, and the Israelites had none of these things. So to leave behind all of these weapons is a great boon for the Israelite army. Second thing, David took another step for kingship. It made him famous to be the one who killed Goliath. It made him influential with Saul because he later became Saul's son-in-law and a part of his inner circle. And it started him on that journey where he would become king of Israel. So you remember I said just a few minutes ago that the fight was rigged? That the Philistines attempted to rig the fight? Well, it turns out the fight was rigged, but not by the Philistines. God had decided the outcome. Yes, David picked up the stones. Yes, he swung the sling. But it was God who gave the victory. Rather than be intimidated by what appears to be a mountain, we need to rethink the situations of our lives. We need to trust in God and be obedient as David did. We need to have faith and join the battle. And then, even before we do that, we need to take another look at the obstacles before us. There are bound to be things that look like disadvantages that we can turn into advantages. When we know that the battle is already won, we can approach it with the same confidence David had. Amen? We're going to conclude our service this morning, have our musicians come back and lead us in the singing of hymn number 52. Because God has put it on your heart today to stand with confidence before Him. If there's a change you want to make in your life today, to accept Christ as Savior, to become a member of our church, to rededicate your life, whatever step of faith you want to take today, please take it. Come forward as we sing number 52.